Alright, now this video is going to be on cluster row minefields or cluster minefields. As I said in a video on minefield clusters, the only training I got on this was basically like this on a whiteboard and a talk through. I have not actually put one of these on the ground in training or for real. So I had to do some reading in the manuals on this, and the manual that covers this or has a chapter in there is FM 20-32 mine and countermine operations. Really, you want to look for mid-90s and earlier, because the newer ones probably are not going to talk about cluster row minefields, because officially the only place they can use anti-personnel mines is in Korea, and I'm getting indications that they're being phased out of the inventory even there. So, now, according to the doctrine that I read, the frontage and the depth of a cluster row minefield is limited by three things. One, the terrain you're trying to conform it in. Two, the time that you have to put the minefield in. And three, the materials you have available, because these types of minefields take a considerable amount of mines, especially anti-personnel mines. Now, if you don't put in anti-personnel mines, it's not a cluster row minefield. It falls in the categories of standard row minefield, which I've talked about in the past. Now, according to the doctrine, you may or may not have an IOE, that is an irregular outer edge. If you have an IOE on your cluster row minefield, no tripwires are supposed to be employed anywhere in these clusters, and the clusters are only on these short strips, as they are called in the doctrine. So all the mines in the clusters on the IOE have to be pressure only. So you can put bounding fragmentation mines in those clusters. You cannot attach them to tripwires though, or tripwires attached to them for initiation. They have to be set for pressure. The distance between your IOE and your Alpha row, Bravo row, Charlie, Delta, Echo, however many you go down, the guidance on that is it has to be a minimum of 15 meters. No standard. Conform it to the terrain that you're trying to cover. But the closest any of these mines can be to the next row is 15 meters. So in actuality, when you think about it, the actual distance between these rows is actually supposed to be a minimum of 21 meters, and you'll understand here soon. Now, with the IOE first here, you have your end row marker, no mines there. On your report, it will be IOE 1. You then have your azimuth, which is random, up to your turn point, azimuth to your next turn point, next turn point, next turn point, and the end is IOE 2. Now, your short strips are the only locations on the IOE that will have mines. So our first turn point here after IOE 1 is I1, then it's I2, 3, 4, going on down the line until you get to your next end row marker. Now on your short strips, the start point would be your I1, I2 or whatever, and then the end of it, your end point, will be I1E for I1 end, or I2E, I3E, I4E. You get the idea. Now the first cluster is always laid on the enemy side first, and it is 6 meters from your end row marker here, your turn point. that cluster is 3 meters from the center of your short strip. And then the end of that 3 meters, that's where you're going to put your anti-tank mine or your metallic anti-personnel mine. And then you have a maximum of 5 mines in that cluster, so you can add 4 mines around your base mine. The maximum they can be from your base mine is 2 meters in a semicircle, not a full circle, just a semicircle. The first one that you would lay out would be your I-1-1, and this next one would be I-1-2, I-1-3, I-1-4, I-1-5. When you're marking the stuff on your reports. The reports on this has got to be a monster. I can somewhat understand why this was really discontinued. Now the distance between this cluster and the cluster across from it is 3 meters. And this cluster from the next cluster over on the same side, center line to center line on the base mine, is 6 meters. So even here you have 6 meters from your base mine here to your base mine here. The closest any of the anti-personnel mines that are in your minefield cluster can be to mines in the next cluster is 2 meters. Now, the number of clusters that are supposed to be in your IOE, according to doctrine, is 1/3 of the number of clusters in your regular rows in the mine strip. So now we'll move down to the alpha row, your regular rows, and these are referred to as mine strips. Alpha 1, a turn point, Alpha 2. And there's no numbering on the turn points inside your regular rows. The center line in here is your safe zone. This entire area from the front mine of your front cluster to the rear mine of your rear cluster, that is referred to as a mine strip going all the way across. According to doctrine, the first cluster that gets put in is 6 meters from your end row marker, always on your enemy side. And the enemy side ones will always be numbered as odd numbers. The clusters that are on the friendly side are even numbers. So your first one, Alpha 1, Alpha 2, Alpha 3, Alpha 4, Alpha 5, Alpha 6, Alpha 7, Alpha 8, Alpha 9, going all the way down. And your last cluster is 6 meters from your end row marker. Now, if you cannot put a particular cluster in because of a boulder, debris, a building, a tree, anything that will stop you from putting that cluster in, you skip that number. So let's say we couldn't put this one in here because there's a giant rock here. So Alpha 7, you will mark on there Alpha 7, omit it. And then this next one next to it would be Alpha 9. And it's the same on the rows going back. And as I mentioned, the distance between each row has to be a minimum of 15 meters from the rearmost mine, from this mine strip. Must be a minimum of 15 meters from the frontmost mine of the next mine strip. Conform it to the terrain. Just double checking on some notes here before I give you some indications on emplacement. I did watch a video that was done in the 1950s about putting one of these strips in. The last note that I have is the closest mine to the perimeter fence or the frat fence, the closest that mine can be from that fence is also 15 meters. Now, how was this type of thing emplaced? As I said, I watched a video from the 1950s, which I don't even think is online anymore, on putting in a row in a cluster row minefield. So first off, you had your marking party. That marking party would put in their end row marker, and they would tie white engineer tape or rope to it. They would then string that out to where their turn would be, put in a picket or a large board, stick in the ground, tie off their engineer tape or rope to it, and they continued going through. You had another party that would come along, and they would be the ones that would mark out the IOEs, the actual short strips, and they would also mark out the clusters on your regular rows. So they would go to that turn point there. They would run some engineer tape or rope out to the end row marker of that short strip. And then every 6 meters, they would tie in a 3 meter length of rope or engineer tape, tie it off to a rock or a stick, make sure that it was straight out, so you had a good 90-degree angle off of here. And they would put down what's supposed to be there. The other side, same thing, going out. After that, you would have your laying party. The laying party would come out with the mines. You'd have one person that would have the anti-tank mine. They would set it there. And then you'd have, say, 2 to 4 people that would carry anti-personnel mines. And they would lay down the correct number of mines for each cluster. So right next to that anti-tank mine, they would probably set down one M16 bounding fragmentation mine. And then they would put down, you know, whatever amount of M14s or other pressure activated mines next to that for that cluster. And they would go down and do that for each one. Set them at the end of that tail for the cluster. And they would go through that for all of them. After this is laid out, the marking team and the laying team would go on and move to the next row. You would then have your emplacement team come in. The emplacement team walks right down that rope or engineer tape, and they get sent out by the NCO in charge of that row. It could be a platoon sergeant, more than likely it's going to be a squad leader. Sends the people down, assigns them to each cluster. They then go through, dig the holes for the mines, set the mine next to the hole. As I said, with the smaller anti-personnel mines especially, you're probably going to want to have a stick with some type of flag on it, like a piece of engineered tape or bright cloth, that you're going to stick right next to that hole, and they can see it in the grass or whatever that these mines are being hidden in. So we got our holes dug for each of them. Then you're going to have the person that's going to be in charge of arming them. He's going to go through and place and arm that cluster. He's going to bring that tape with him. He's also going to bring the tape from up here with him down to the next one. Arm this cluster. Brings that tape with him, does this one. Brings the tape with him, does this one. Brings the tape with him, does this one. Brings it back to this point. All the tapes should be there. You're going to go through and repeat on each of those. Once each of these, on the IOE, each of these short strips are done, The NCOIC, who will stick along the safe path here, will go back, disconnect it from the end row marker, bringing the tape with them, disconnect it from this marker, the turn marker. Just keep bringing that tape with as he collects up the soldier that armed each short strip. According to doctrine that I could find, the soldier that armed each strip is supposed to turn over all the pins, clips, arming wrenches over to that NCOIC. He is supposed to put them inside a bag. It could be his rucksack or a rucksack that he has emptied out for this purpose. Could be a sandbag. It could be just a shoulder bag that's on his side, but he's supposed to collect up each of it and make sure he has the correct number. He should have a count of what's the standard that he's supposed to expect for each short strip. Make sure that soldier turns over the correct number of each item, puts it in a bag, and then they just keep moving down till they get all the tape collected up, disconnected from the end row marker. That's in place, and then they follow down along the side out the minefield. They'll either come back around and start over here, or they can start from here going across and then, you know, go this way. According to doctrine, you can't switch, which is kind of weird, different than we did it in a row minefield. Now with the standard regular row, same thing. You had them put out your center line for each strip, and then you had a team come in behind them, putting in the 3-meter length of rope or tape. That's same as before, connected to a stick or a picket there or a rock, going all the way down for each of the clusters in that mine strip. Then you have them coming through, moving down, laying the mines at the end of each cluster. They always return to the center strip before they continue on. I did not see anything in the doctrine about, or at least what I read, about using vehicles to transport the mines going down. Could that be done? Potentially, but you'd have to make sure that that vehicle and trailer or whatever you're using will not mess up your center line here or the lines coming off for your clusters. Go through for each row once, and my guess is on this, similar to a standard row minefield, all the arming wrenches, all the pins, all the clips for each row will be buried 30 inches from the end row marker. As to which end, I couldn't find a real explanation on that. Typically, we would do them near your one side where you started the row. I'm guessing it's going to be a unit SOP, and I really would mark it on the minefield record where that sandbag or that box, whatever you got that has everything, is buried at and protected so that they can find it. Removal of these must be an absolute monster. I have no idea how you really could clear something like this. Because typically we would just follow our rows going down and, you know, locate the mine, disarm it, you know, and went all the way down the row, and you had a team that would come up behind you collecting up the mine and the fuse and everything, putting it inside a vehicle behind you that stayed way behind your disarming team. Something like this, it has to be a monster. I'm not even sure how to truly tackle the disarming of something like this. What I did see in the doctrine when I was reading in 20-32 was you have to have, your turns have to have a marker there, and your end rows and the end of your strips also has to have a marker to assist with locating the general outline of the minefield for when you would come back later to remove it, to disarm everything and clear that spot. Or whatever unit would come through potentially years later, remove those mines. And as I said, if a particular cluster could not be emplaced, it must be noted on the minefield record that that cluster was omitted. You don't have to give the reason. You just have to write that on there. You know, Alpha 7, you know, Bravo 23, Charlie 16, Charlie 27 omitted. You have to make notes on that stuff on the records. And that's what I could find on Cluster Row Minefields. This thing must have been a damn headache when they actually did this. The emplacement times when I was looking on the charts at this is just mind-blowing how long it takes a platoon to put in even a single row, a single mine strip in one of these minefields. This is just a monster. I'm actually glad now after reading it that my platoon leadership never made us actually go through and do this in training. It would have taken us at least a day just to get in one single row minefield. Now, for all my engineer brothers in the Patriot Militia movements, always remember, essay arms.